Welcome to Worth Coin. What if a tiny 1-cent coin from 1950 could be hiding a story so extraordinary that collectors would stop everything just to examine it? At first glance, a 1950p Lincoln cent looks like an ordinary piece of American pocket change. But some examples connected to unusual errors, exceptional preservation, rare varieties, or extraordinary provenance can attract enormous attention. And in the dramatic valuation claims surrounding rare coins, figures reaching as high as $50 million have been associated with extraordinary specimens. Although such a figure should be treated as a sensational estimate or claim rather than a confirmed standard market price for an ordinary 1950p cent. So before you dismiss an old penny, stay with me until the very end, because we are going to uncover exactly what makes a coin from this era fascinating, what details collectors inspect under magnification, and why one tiny difference can completely change the story behind a coin. And remember, this is only the beginning, because later in this video we will examine another 1-cent coin whose story takes an unexpected turn, and I promise you will want to see what separates an ordinary example from a truly remarkable discovery. Now let's go back to the beginning and take a closer look at the 1950p Lincoln cent. The year 1950 sits in an especially interesting chapter of American history. The United States was moving through the post-war era. Industries were expanding, families were rebuilding their lives, and coins were circulating through a rapidly changing economy. The Lincoln cent had already become one of the most recognizable American coins, featuring Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and the familiar wheat ears on the reverse. For collectors today, that design is important because the wheat reverse ended only a few years later, making every 1950 wheat cent part of the final generation of what collectors commonly call wheat pennies. But here's where things become interesting. Simply being old does not automatically make a coin extremely valuable. Millions of coins from the era were produced, circulated, saved, spent, lost, and eventually worn down. What collectors really want to know is whether the particular coin in front of them possesses something unusual. Is the strike unusually sharp? Is the surface remarkably original? Is there a legitimate mint error? Is there a recognized die variety? Was the coin preserved in an exceptional grade? Does it have an interesting provenance? These are the questions that can transform a simple penny into a serious numismatic object. The P designation is another detail collectors naturally examine, because a mint mark can tell us where a coin was produced. However, collectors should never assume that every unusual-looking mark is a mint mark or an error. On old coins, scratches, dents, stains, corrosion, polishing, and damage can create appearances that look dramatic to an inexperienced eye, but have little premium value to a professional collector. This is why the first rule of rare coin hunting is simple. Never judge rarity from appearance alone. Use magnification, compare the coin against trusted references, and if the potential is significant, consider professional authentication. Now let's talk about the headline figure that makes stories about this coin so exciting. Claims of a 1950p cent reaching an extraordinary $50 million valuation belong in the category of highly exceptional or hypothetical specimens, not as the normal value of a circulated 1950p penny. A genuine ordinary example is nowhere near such a figure. The reason these huge numbers appear in rare coin discussions is that the world of numismatics occasionally produces coins with combinations of rarity, condition, historical importance, errors, and provenance that can create astonishing valuations. But there is a critical distinction between an internet claim, an estimated value, an insurance valuation, and a documented public auction result. Serious collectors understand that distinction, and you should too. If someone tells you that every 1950p penny is worth millions, be extremely cautious. The exciting part is not believing every headline. The exciting part is learning how to determine whether your individual coin has characteristics that genuinely deserve attention. Imagine finding an old box in a family attic. Inside are photographs, letters, a few foreign coins, and a handful of wheat cents. Most of them look dark and worn. But one catches your eye. The date is visible. The details seem unusually sharp. The surfaces have a strange appearance. Maybe the rim looks different. Maybe one letter appears distorted. Maybe the reverse design seems slightly unusual. You place it beneath a magnifying glass, and suddenly that ordinary penny becomes a mystery. That is exactly the feeling that keeps collectors searching. The discovery does not begin with a price tag. It begins with a question: what happened to this coin? One of the most important areas to inspect is the strike. A coin struck with unusual pressure, improperly aligned dies, or other minting complications can sometimes display characteristics that make it more interesting than a normal specimen. Collectors look carefully at Lincoln's portrait, the lettering, the date, the wheat ears, the rim, and the overall sharpness of the design. They also examine whether apparent doubling is genuine. This is a crucial point because many coins show what looks like doubling when viewed casually. Machine doubling, die deterioration, post-mint damage, and photographic effects can all create confusing appearances. True double die characteristics are a specific type of mint variety and must be evaluated carefully. Another fascinating area is off-center striking. If a planchet is not properly positioned when struck, portions of the design can appear shifted toward the edge. The more dramatic and legitimate the error, the more attention it may receive. But again, not every off-looking coin is automatically rare. Damage after the coin left the mint can imitate certain errors. A coin dropped onto a hard surface, squeezed, scraped, or altered can develop strange shapes that have nothing to do with the original minting process. That is why collectors love the phrase "mint made" when discussing genuine errors. They want evidence that the unusual feature occurred during production rather than years later in someone's pocket. Another possibility collectors consider is a die crack. As dies are repeatedly used, stress can produce cracks or other abnormalities. A crack may appear as a raised line across part of the design. Depending on its location and prominence, it can become an interesting collectible feature. There are also cases where die deterioration changes the appearance of letters or numbers. But once again, the challenge is separating a legitimate die characteristic from ordinary wear or damage. This is where the detective work becomes addictive. You are not merely looking at a penny. You are reconstructing its journey through the mint, circulation, storage, and time. Condition is another major factor. A coin that spent decades circulating could show flattened wheat ears, scratches, discoloration, rim bumps, and loss of detail. Another example from the same year could have remained protected in a collection almost from the moment it was produced. The difference can be enormous from a collector's perspective. Professional grading services evaluate factors such as wear, strike, surface quality, color, and other characteristics, although exact grading requires expert examination of the physical coin. This is why two coins with the same date and mint mark can have dramatically different market values. One may be a common circulated example, while another may be a beautifully preserved specimen that attracts competitive bidding. And here's another detail that can make collectors pay attention: provenance. Imagine a coin accompanied by documentation showing that it belonged to a respected collection for decades, or that it was discovered in a historically important group of coins. Provenance does not magically make an ordinary coin priceless, but when a coin is already rare and desirable, a documented history can make it much more fascinating to the market. This is one reason major collections often receive so much attention. Collectors are not just buying metal, they are buying history, scarcity, condition, and the story surrounding the object. Now picture another scenario. Someone inherits a small coin album from a grandparent. They open it expecting nothing more than sentimental value. There, between several worn Lincoln cents, is a 1950p example that appears almost untouched. The family member assumes it is simply old. They nearly spend it. They nearly place it in a drawer and forget about it. But then they look closer. That moment is what every treasure hunter dreams about. And even if the coin does not turn out to be worth a fortune, the investigation itself can reveal something valuable: the history of American money. This is why I always encourage viewers to examine coins carefully before spending or discarding them. The goal is not to believe every sensational valuation you see online. The goal is to learn enough that you can recognize when something deserves a second look. So what should you actually inspect on a 1950p cent? Start with the date and mint mark. Then inspect the entire obverse and reverse under good lighting. Look for unusual doubling, dramatic off-center striking, missing design elements, abnormal lettering, die cracks, planchet problems, unusual surfaces, and signs of post-mint damage. Examine the rim carefully because significant mint errors can sometimes become obvious there. Then compare your coin with authenticated examples rather than relying on a random social media photograph. If you believe you have something unusual, avoid cleaning it. This is extremely important. Cleaning can permanently damage the original surface and may reduce collector interest. Do not scratch it, polish it, rub it with chemicals, or attempt a home restoration. Put it somewhere safe and seek an experienced numismatist or reputable grading service if the evidence appears convincing. Now here's where our story gets even more exciting. The enormous valuation figure we mentioned earlier should not convince you that every old penny is a hidden fortune. Instead, it should make you ask a better question. What exact combination of characteristics would be required for a coin to approach an extraordinary valuation? The answer could involve extreme rarity, a spectacular mint error, exceptional preservation, historical importance, documented provenance, and intense competition among collectors. In other words, the date alone is not the treasure. The details are the treasure. And that is the lesson that separates casual coin searching from serious numismatic hunting. Think about how many old pennies have passed through people's hands without anyone ever checking them. Some were thrown into jars. Some disappeared under furniture. Some were buried in gardens. Some traveled across states in pockets and cash registers. Others were carefully stored by collectors who understood that future generations might appreciate them. Every surviving coin has a story, and sometimes the smallest clues reveal the biggest mysteries. So if you have a 1950p cent at home, don't immediately assume it is either worthless or a multi-million-dollar treasure. Examine it calmly. Compare it carefully. Preserve it properly. And most importantly, learn what makes genuine rarity different from ordinary damage. Because once you understand that distinction, you can begin searching with a collector's eye rather than simply looking at dates. And I want you to stay with this series, because the next coin we examine is going to introduce a completely different chapter in the story of American cents. I won't reveal its value here, but there is a particular reason collectors and treasure hunters become fascinated when they encounter certain examples from its era. So don't click away after this coin, because the next discovery may change the way you look at the pennies sitting in your own collection. Before we move on, take one last look at your old wheat cents and ask yourself, have you ever actually inspected the tiny details around the date, lettering, rim, and reverse design? That one extra inspection could be the difference between overlooking an interesting coin and recognizing a genuine numismatic curiosity. And remember, the greatest discoveries are not always found in famous auction houses. Sometimes they begin in a forgotten jar, an inherited album, an old drawer, or a handful of change that someone was about to spend. The 1950p Lincoln cent reminds us that age creates history, but rarity, condition, authenticity, and evidence create numismatic significance. And while the extraordinary $50 million figure associated with sensational claims about a coin like this makes for an incredible headline, the real treasure is understanding what you actually have in your hand. Keep searching, keep learning, and never underestimate the smallest coin in the room. Because we've only uncovered the first mystery today, and the next one is waiting just ahead. Stay with Worth Coin, because the next penny in our journey has another story to tell, and I guarantee you will want to see the tiny details that could make collectors stop and look twice. Next, 1989 P1 cent. And this is where our journey takes a fascinating turn, because when most people hear the words 1989 penny, they immediately think of an ordinary coin that could still be hiding somewhere in a drawer, jar, or pocket. But what if one particular example had a feature that made collectors stop and examine it again and again? What if a tiny production mistake, unusual variety, exceptional condition, or remarkable provenance transformed an otherwise familiar Lincoln cent into a coin worthy of serious attention? Some sensational claims have placed extraordinary values as high as $80 million on exceptional examples. But that figure should never be confused with the normal value of an ordinary 1989p cent. The real mystery is what characteristics could make a particular coin dramatically more desirable than the millions of ordinary pieces that exist. And by the end of this story, you will know exactly what collectors look for before deciding whether a 1989p cent deserves a second look. And don't go anywhere, because this is not the final mystery in our journey. Another remarkable coin is still waiting ahead, and I won't reveal its value. But its story is exactly the kind of discovery that keeps collectors searching through old change long after everyone else has stopped looking. The 1989p Lincoln cent belongs to a completely different generation from the wheat penny we just examined. By 1989, the familiar Lincoln Memorial reverse had been part of American coinage for decades, and the United States Mint was producing enormous quantities of cents for everyday commerce. To most people, these coins were simply spending money. They moved through supermarkets, vending machines, parking meters, cash registers, school cafeterias, banks, and countless pockets across the country. Yet that is precisely what makes modern coin hunting so fascinating. A coin can be produced in enormous numbers and still contain individual examples with unusual characteristics. The key is understanding that rarity is not determined simply by age. A coin from the late 20th century can sometimes be more interesting than a much older coin if it contains a legitimate mint error, an unusual variety, an exceptional grade, or another characteristic that collectors actively pursue. When you first encounter a 1989p cent, the first thing to remember is that the P indicates production at the Philadelphia Mint. That small mint mark is important because collectors often separate coins by mint of origin when studying varieties, production quantities, and errors. But don't make the mistake of thinking that the mint mark itself automatically makes the coin rare. Instead, consider it the beginning of the investigation. You want to know how the coin was made, how well it survived, and whether anything unusual happened during its journey from the mint to circulation. Now imagine a collector sitting at a desk late at night with a bright lamp, a magnifying glass, and a pile of old cents spread across the table. Most coins receive only a few seconds of attention. Date, mint mark, condition, next coin. But then the collector picks up a 1989p cent and notices something strange around the lettering. Perhaps the shape seems unusual. Perhaps a design element appears doubled. Perhaps the rim has a feature that doesn't look normal. The collector stops. The coin is placed beneath stronger magnification. The lighting changes. Reference photographs are brought out. Suddenly, that ordinary penny becomes a question waiting for an answer. This is the moment that drives the entire hobby. The discovery of a potential error is exciting, but excitement must be followed by verification. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is assuming that every strange-looking mark is a valuable error. Coins can be damaged in countless ways after leaving the mint. They can be scraped, squeezed, scratched, exposed to chemicals, heated, bent, struck against other objects, or altered deliberately. These forms of damage can create shapes that look dramatic but have little numismatic significance. A genuine mint error, on the other hand, occurred during the manufacturing process. That distinction is everything. Consider an off-center strike. During normal production, a blank planchet must be correctly positioned between dies before the striking process occurs. If something goes wrong and the planchet is not properly centered, the resulting coin can have part of the design shifted toward the edge. Dramatic off-center errors can attract collectors because they provide visible evidence of a manufacturing mistake. But the size and nature of the error matter, and professional examination may be necessary to determine whether a strange-looking coin is truly mint-made. Another possibility is a clipped planchet. Before blanks become finished coins, metal is prepared and cut into appropriate shapes. If something goes wrong during the blanking process, a piece can be missing from the edge, creating a distinctive curved or straight clip. Genuine examples can be collectible, especially when the characteristics clearly demonstrate that the problem occurred before or during striking. But once again, damage can imitate these appearances. That is why experienced collectors examine the entire coin rather than focusing on one dramatic feature. Then there is doubled imagery, one of the most frequently discussed subjects among coin hunters. A genuine doubled die can occur when the die itself receives a hub impression in a way that creates duplicated design elements. Collectors may examine letters, numbers, and other details for specific forms of doubling. However, not every apparent double image represents a valuable doubled die variety. Machine doubling can produce a different appearance, and ordinary wear or damage can confuse the picture even further. If you believe your 1989 cent has doubling, compare it carefully with established references and authenticated examples before making any assumptions about value. This is where the real skill of coin collecting begins. You are not simply hunting for something that looks weird. You are learning to identify patterns that have a known cause and documented significance. Another area worth examining is the rim. The rim can provide clues about how a coin was struck and whether unusual circumstances occurred during production. A broad strike, for example, can happen when the collar does not properly contain the planchet during striking. The resulting coin may appear broader than normal, with design details extending toward areas that would usually be constrained. A coin with an unusual edge or shape may therefore deserve closer inspection, but again, post-mint damage must be ruled out. Collectors also examine the surface for signs of a plating or composition problem, depending on the coin's manufacturing characteristics. Modern cents from different periods can have different compositions and production methods. An unusual color or surface appearance does not automatically mean a rare error. Environmental exposure can dramatically change the appearance of copper and copper-plated coins. A coin that has turned dark, reddish, greenish, or unusually pale may simply have experienced chemical or environmental changes. The collector's challenge is determining whether the unusual appearance originated at the mint or happened later. And that is why professional authentication matters when the potential stakes become high. Now let's return to the sensational valuation claim surrounding this coin. You may hear numbers reaching toward $80 million in online videos, posts, or speculative discussions. But a responsible collector should immediately ask, is that a documented auction price? Is it an insurance estimate? Is it a hypothetical valuation? Is it an internet claim? Is there a recognized auction record? Those questions matter because the value of a coin is determined by the actual market and the characteristics of the individual specimen, not simply by repeating a dramatic number. A normal 1989 p-cent is not automatically worth millions. In fact, most ordinary examples are common. The fascinating possibility lies in the exceptional specimen, not the date alone. Imagine two identical-looking 1989 p-cents placed side by side. One has circulated for decades. Its surfaces contain scratches, its design shows wear, and its overall appearance is ordinary. The second was preserved almost immediately after production. Its details are sharp, its surfaces are clean and original, and perhaps it contains a verified mint error or rare variety. To an untrained eye, they may both be 1989 pennies. To a serious collector, they could represent completely different levels of desirability. Condition is one of the most important reasons. The grading process attempts to describe the state of preservation and other characteristics of a coin. Higher grade examples can command premiums when demand is strong, especially when the coin is scarce in those grades. But collectors should remember that grading is not merely about whether a coin looks shiny. Surface marks, strike quality, color, luster, cleaning, and other factors can all influence how a coin is evaluated. One of the worst things you can do to a potentially valuable coin is clean it. You might think polishing the surface will make it more attractive, but collectors generally value originality. Abrasive cleaning can leave microscopic scratches and permanently alter the coin's appearance. Chemical cleaning can cause additional problems. If you think you have found something unusual, preserve it exactly as you found it and seek expert advice. Now think about the possibility that your 1989 p-cent came from a family collection. Maybe someone bought rolls of cents decades ago and stored them away. Maybe an older relative collected coins, but never had the opportunity to examine every piece under magnification. Maybe the coin sat untouched in a small envelope for years. That story alone doesn't make it valuable, but it creates a fascinating possibility. The coin may have survived in a condition far better than the examples that spent decades circulating. This is one reason coin collecting can feel like treasure hunting. You never know which object has escaped the normal wear and tear of everyday life. The next thing collectors consider is attribution. If a coin appears to show an unusual die characteristic, specialists may compare it against known die markers and varieties. This process can sometimes reveal that what initially looked like a random defect is actually a recognized variety. The reverse can be especially important when examining Lincoln cents because collectors study lettering, design details, spacing, and other characteristics. You should inspect both sides rather than focusing only on the portrait. Turn the coin over. Look at the entire reverse. Examine the lettering. Inspect the memorial building. Check the rim. Look at the date. Look at the mint mark. Then examine the surfaces. A potential discovery can hide anywhere. Now here's the part one want you to remember. Don't let a huge valuation claim make you careless. If you find a 1989 p-cent that looks unusual, don't immediately post it online claiming you have an $80 million coin. Instead, document what you see. Take clear photographs under neutral lighting. Avoid touching the surfaces unnecessarily. Compare the coin with reliable references. Ask an experienced numismatist. If the evidence remains compelling, consider professional authentication and grading. This approach protects you from both disappointment and misinformation, and it gives you a much better chance of recognizing genuine rarity when you encounter it. There's another reason this coin is so interesting. It demonstrates that coin collecting isn't only about ancient treasures. People often assume that only coins from the 18th or 19th centuries can be valuable. But errors and varieties can occur in any era. The machines may become more sophisticated, but manufacturing processes still involve enormous numbers of blanks, dies, presses, inspections, transportation steps, and other stages where something unusual can happen. A small production mistake can create an individual coin that looks different from the millions surrounding it. Sometimes those differences are obvious. Sometimes they are incredibly subtle. The subtle ones are the reason collectors use magnification and specialized references. Picture yourself finding a coin that looks completely ordinary until you rotate it beneath the light. A strange line appears. You turn it again. The line changes with the angle. Is it a die crack? A scratch? Something else? You inspect another area and notice unusual lettering. Suddenly, you're no longer casually looking at a penny. You're conducting an investigation. That feeling of discovery is worth more than any sensational headline because it teaches you to see coins differently. And if you've been checking your own collection while listening to this, tell yourself one thing: don't rush. The most interesting coin may not be the one that looks the strangest. It may be the one whose unusual feature has a clear, explainable minting origin. This is why education is the true advantage in coin hunting. The more you learn about planchets, dies, strikes, mint marks, varieties, grading, and post-mint damage, the easier it becomes to separate genuine opportunities from false alarms. And we're not finished yet. Remember the other coins waiting in this journey. I am not going to reveal their values, because I want you to experience the mystery as we move forward. But one of the upcoming coins brings us into another fascinating period of American 1-cent production, and the details you learn from examining this 1989 p-cent may help you understand why the next discovery deserves your attention. So before you leave this video, take a moment to look through your old cents. Check the dates. Check the mint marks. Look at the rims. Examine the lettering. And if you discover something that doesn't seem right, don't clean it and don't throw it away. Set it aside and investigate. You may discover that it is ordinary, and that's perfectly fine. You may discover a minor collectible variety, or you may discover something genuinely unusual that deserves professional attention. The important thing is that you looked. The 1989 p-cent teaches us one of the most important lessons in numismatics. Rarity is not always obvious, and value is never determined by a dramatic number alone. A coin's real story lives in its manufacturing characteristics, preservation, authenticity, rarity, demand, and documented history. The sensational $80 million figure may sound unbelievable, and for an ordinary example it certainly would be, but extraordinary valuations are exactly why responsible collectors learn to investigate rather than simply believe. So keep that magnifying glass nearby, because this journey isn't ending here. The next coin is waiting, and I'm keeping its most surprising details hidden for now. You have already seen how an apparently ordinary cent can become a fascinating mystery once you understand what to look for. Now imagine applying that same collector's eye to the next coin in our story. Don't spend that old penny before checking it. Don't clean it before understanding it. And never assume that a coin's appearance tells you everything. Sometimes the smallest detail is the clue that changes the entire story. And when we move to the next coin, you'll see why the world of American cents can become even more unpredictable. So stay with Worth Coin. Keep your collection close, and get ready for the next chapter, because the next coin may have a story you absolutely do not want to miss.